Okay. We are testing the ignition on the R18. Remember that the first hall sensor seemed to burn out on it. I actually contacted the company, who gladly sent me a new one, but while I was waiting, I picked up a bunch of individual discrete hall sensors, and I wired up two separate ones to the old harness, and they both worked for brief periods and then burnt out within a few minutes of operation. So my suspicion is that, like the EngineDIY engine that had the 3 leads, there is a problem inside the ignition module where it is not just sending the spark up the ignition wire, but also sending the ignition spark backwards through the hall sensor harness. And hall sensors are not supposed to have a spark voltage put through them, and I think that's what's going on, why they're going bad. So I have the new hall sensor that I think is burnt out, the official one, all wired up from the replacement from the factory that we were using the other day, that stopped working after about 10 minutes. And just double checking, I have it put in the harness and the ignition on and the batteries in, and there's no spark. But if I take my other harness, the old one from the first sensor, and plug it onto the hall sensor location, I can tap these 2 leads and get a spark. And then this lead here is the one where I think it's back feeding the spark from the ignition module, because if I tie this one to the igniter here, the spark plug, make sure that's rested on the ground there. Very hard to do. I can if I can get my wires arranged in the right spot. To tap them together. It also sparks off this lead. And this lead is connected to the sensor, so if it's sparking from this lead through the sensor, then that is why I believe the hall sensor is getting burned out by a faulty ignition module. The EngineDIY, like I said, the EngineDIY has the same problem, but because the EngineDIY just uses a straight set of contacts for the ignition system, the third wire was just loose on the side of the engine, and when I discovered it was sparking backwards through that third wire, I was able to just cut that wire off and insulate it to make sure that the spark was going through the ignition wire and through the spark plug instead of grounding out through this harness. So that is what I think is happening here, and I'm in contact with the company again to see about trying a new ignition module, if that is indeed the case, because of all the ignition modules I've got on all these engines, this is the only one that has had any real issues. They've all otherwise worked great, and generally when they lose spark, it's just because I finally have batteries that aren't any good, and replacing the batteries will fix it.